Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, so glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Wish we had a good martini for you. We've got two bad martinis and a crazy one, and maybe they're all crazy on some level, but just to let you know a little bit of housekeeping here for the Three Martini Lunch as well. Today and tomorrow we will have our usual fare here on the Three Martini Lunch, and then Jim and I have been very busy recording our year-end specials for the Three Martini Lunch. There'll be 6 installments of those starting on Monday and going through New Year's Eve, and there will be a special also on Christmas Day, going back to our interview with Robert Davi. I mean, we talk about Die Hard. It's Christmas. I mean, of course, we're going to bring that back. And then on New Year's Day, we'll have our predictions for 2025. And so, Jim, let's kick it off with the most thorny of the bad martinis, and that's going to be situation on Capitol Hill, funding the government, this omnibus bill, which we both hate, but they always seem to keep happening, especially this time of year. Come on, if you want to go home, spend time with your family, you got to vote for this. But yesterday, there was a revolt, due in part to the fact that the bill didn't actually get printed till, late Tuesday, maybe very early Wednesday, and 1,547 pages, whereas the continuing resolution back in September when they hit the new fiscal year was 21 pages. So I think a lot of people would have said, okay, we understand wanting to go 90 days here, kick it into the Trump administration, Republican majority. But instead of just continuing to do what the government was already funding, there's a lot more in here. More than $300 billion in new spending. There's a huge pay hike for members of Congress, which I'm sure everybody's excited about. There's also odd provisions about things like you can't subpoena stuff that the previous Congress did, which is not going over very well at all. There's also, of course, disaster relief involved here, about $100 billion worth. Some people say that's important to do. It should be standalone. Others say Democrats are kind of using that as leverage of what's got to be done. So there's frustration on the conservative side, the moderate side, people saying that Johnson basically negotiated with the Democrats here. On the flip side, Jim, Trump's now adding more fuel to the fire here by wanting a debt ceiling extension. And all of this, of course, is coming as if there is a shutdown as of midnight Friday, that's going to affect potentially air travel and other things that could make people's holidays less than ideal, not to mention the people who won't get paid during the holidays, but they will whenever this would ultimately be resolved. So it's kind of a mess. The silver lining is it's good people are paying attention to government waste, but it would have been much better if this had happened much earlier in the process and we weren't like 36 hours away from everything shutting down and all the finger pointing happening.
Yeah, well, first of all, our programming note. I have the last page of my Snoopy calendar here. If something happens after Friday the 20th that you think, wow, that would really make an amazing end of the year award, I wonder if Jim or Greg are going to pick that one. Don't be shocked if we didn't. For us to say, to scrap our existing recordings and say, all right, we're re-recording. It turns out the drones over New Jersey will have to be aliens. That will get us off our Christmas vacation and do that. But also when I'm looking at this calendar, right here, the 20th is when the continuing resolution funding the government runs out. Mike Johnson, did you know that? A lot of these objections are fair. These saying that you want to take care of hurricane relief. That's a perfectly legitimate thing to want to get done. Trump wanting to not have to deal with a debt ceiling. That is a perfect, like all these are legitimate concerns. But guys, it's like 2 or 3 days. Where have you been? If you'd started this discussion like 3 weeks ago, we probably could have had some sort of these things being arranged. The editors of National Review wrote an editorial saying this CR deserved to die. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's extraneous in it that you just simply cannot justify, or certainly does not belong wrapped up in it. So you have to vote it to keep the government operating and all that kind of stuff. So I concur with that. In today's Morning Jolt, I walked through the consequences of a government shutdown. Now, if you figure out how to pass something on Saturday, Sunday, maybe even to Monday morning, the consequences will be pretty minimal. The government, like most federal workers aren't working on weekends, so you can, they'll shut down the Smithsonian, and they'll, the network news will do reports on, Middleburg Middle School wanted to go to the Smithsonian, but they found the doors were locked today. What's wrong with you? The usual coverage of a government shutdown. Also, I think it's members of the armed services. Roughly half the Pentagon civilian workers go home because they're deemed non-essential. as you noted, all these people do get paid. So I don't mind. On the other hand, like right before Christmas, saying we expect you to show up for work and we'll pay you at some point. By the way, this applies to Border Patrol. This applies to customs, like everybody, all these things that are really important to Republicans, law enforcement, all that stuff. They don't get paid either, right? Until the government shutdown ends. Oh, by the way, the president gets paid. Oh, by the way, members of Congress get paid. That's just written into law. So they'll be okay. Don't worry about them. But I think the thing that kind of really nags at me, air traffic control. Now, they are generally deemed essential workers and they have to show up to work. Having said that, when you're, show up to work and we'll pay you someday, we don't know when, unsurprisingly, people become less motivated and you start getting people calling in sick. And people are like, well, why don't you just fire them the way Reagan did? Well, you have to prove that they're not really sick before you can, otherwise they can litigate the hell out of this kind of stuff. That's how the longest government shutdown in history, which started at the end of 2018 and stretched into 2019, that's how it ended, was that I think they had anywhere like a dozen air traffic controllers who were supposed to be at work weren't at work. There was a manpower shortage, led to delays, and people started saying this is not safe. And eventually everybody came to see a reason and figured out a deal how to keep the government open. I don't know if we'll get to that, how quickly we would get to that this time. But I'm just going to point out, Greg, you and I know the holidays, everybody's traveling, everybody wants to go visit grandma and grandpa, all that kind of stuff. This would probably lead to the most snarled air traffic issues we've seen since General Esperanza was brought into Dulles Airport back in, was it 90 or 91? I think that was
90, yeah,
90,
Christmas of 90. Yeah.
So now I wrote about that today. People are like, well, you're saying they should have passed the continuing resolution? No, I want a clean continuing resolution. I think if you're going to do hurricane stuff, do that separately. But there are consequences to having a government shutdown. This is not a good time of year to have it. We'll see how this shakes out. The clock is ticking, but just kind of frustrating. This couldn't have been avoided with a little bit more planning a little bit earlier in the story.
Yeah, a clean continuing resolution could have been done when everybody came back after the election and they're doing their leadership elections. If they kept it simple, it would have been very, very easy to get done relatively quickly. And you should have done disaster aid a long time ago. I mean, those terrible floods were late September, very early October. So you've been just sitting on it for 2.5 months to use it as leverage to make everybody vote for the rest of the crap in the bill. I mean, that doesn't seem real compassionate to me. So, no, I don't agree with the people who say just shut it all down till January 20th. But they got caught. They got caught trying to stack this thing like a Christmas tree, just all sorts of different stuff on there for every little interest. And hopefully the lesson is learned going forward. But here's the other thing, Jim. When they did the leadership elections back in November, there was no opposition to Mike Johnson staying on. And now, with the revolt after how he negotiated this with Chuck Schumer, come January 3rd, there's couple votes to spare. It's not going to be as smooth as it would have been, and it could get ugly.
We'll see what House Speaker Musk thinks.
That's what Rand Paul wants.
Like he doesn't have enough jobs as is.
I don't think that's going to happen. But yes, when you're in this situation and one vote can make a huge difference, different ideas get thrown out there. But hopefully, ultimately, it's a good thing that people now realize that you're not going to get away with really bloated, wasteful spending. In the immediate thing, let's just do a clean CR, get to the new Congress and the new president, and hopefully have a much smarter approach to all this stuff. But whether that will happen, I don't know, because the Democrats obviously have a lot of leverage right now, as this Congress and this president are still there. All right, let's talk about Omaha Steaks. Get Omaha Steaks for yourself, your family, your friends here at Christmas time. We are getting very close to Christmas, but you still have time. And I'm telling you, you're going to love the steaks, whether you get the sirloin or the filet mignon. The chicken is great. The seafood is great. The steak cut fries with the burgers or with the steak are just awesome as well. And so you can save 50% site-wide at omahasteaks.com during the Christmas gift buying season, plus get an extra $30 off with the promo code 3ML. And one of the things that Mrs. Columbus has mentioned as well, in addition to the fact that she loves Omaha Steaks just as much as I do, is that the prep is simple. It's just there for you. You've got your own way of cooking these things. So whether you're having a busy day and you don't have a lot of prep time, or you just want something really, really nice for dinner, Omaha Steaks, the way to go. Visit omahasteaks.com and save 50% off site-wide during the Christmas gift buying season. Promo code 3ML. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with the promo code 3ML. Minimum purchase may apply. All All right, Jim, on to officially our first crazy martini. And this is one we've talked about a lot, but it's almost becoming more frustrating now than comical or I told you so. But nonetheless, the Wall Street Journal with the latest indication that, yeah, Joe Biden's been in decline for a long time, probably since his first year in the presidency at least, or at least he's declined a significant amount since then. And you know what? Actually, the administration hid it. They did their best to hide it from the media, from other people in the administration, including cabinet secretaries, from leaders on the Hill. Very, very sinister. And I'm thinking, we could see it every day, man. But anyway, here's what the Wall Street Journal says. To adapt the White House around the needs of a diminished leader, they told visitors to keep meetings focused. Interactions with senior Democratic lawmakers and some cabinet members, including powerful secretaries such as Lloyd Austin and Janet Yellen, were infrequent or grew less frequent. Some legislative leaders had a hard time getting the president's ear at key moments, including ahead of the U.S.'s disastrous pullout from Afghanistan. Senior advisors were often put into roles that some administration officials and lawmakers thought Biden should occupy, with people like National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Senior Counselor Steve Ricchetti, and National Economic Council head Lael Brainerd. Press aides who compiled packages of news clips for Biden were told by senior staff to exclude negative stories about the president. The president wasn't talking to his own pollsters, as surveys showed him trailing in the 2024 race. And so allegedly he's kept in this bubble where he's not exposed to reality at all. We're being lied to consistently, Jim. But the thing that annoys me, in addition to the fact that they went to this trouble to try and lie to us, is that it was still blatantly obvious that now you've got lawmakers and cabinet officials and media saying, I can't believe they deceived us like this.
Listeners, just assume right here, if it seems like that was an awkward pause, that Greg had to delete 10 minutes of me just screaming profanities at the top of my lungs. And I'm calm now. I'm in a better place now. I'm not going to recite all the times we said, see, I told you so. I'm not going to bring up the something is wrong with the president, which I wrote back in August 2021 during the Afghanistan debacle, where Biden was not appearing much in public. There was like a 3 or 4 day stretch where he did not appear. When he did finally appear, he read remarks off a teleprompter and immediately left without taking any questions, ignoring all, like this became a recurring theme of Biden's presidency. But during Afghanistan, which was clearly a top tier grade A foreign policy crisis where you usually want to see the president out and accountable. After a couple of days, finally did the interview with George Stephanopoulos where it went terrible. That was 4 or 5 days ago, man. All of that. I checked the White House. Like the White House is kind of required to put out, this is what the president's doing all day type reports. And he had 2 calls with foreign leaders in a 10-day span. 2. So I'm looking at this like while, Kabul is falling, the Taliban is advancing. The president a month earlier had said the Afghan army is the most best prepared, best prepared, best trained. He had you're not going to see helicopters taking off from the roof of the embassy in Afghanistan. And the president's like, what's the president doing all day? Who is he talking to? What's going on? And why is he incapable of answering questions when it does come out there? I had said, going back to then and for years, Woodward or Bob Costa or somebody else, Jonathan Karl, somebody's going to write a book after the Biden presidency, and it's going to have quotes from the likes of, remember, like, why did we call Ron Klain Prime Minister Ron Klain? Because the jokes were that he was actually running the government and that, Joe Biden was kind of this ceremonial figurehead who they rolled out for the bill signing ceremonies and who wasn't actually making any of the decisions. Well, now it turns out we're true. Now it turns out, oh, by the way, the entire staff had to guide this. There's like a ton of detail. Like and I've heard people like saying, oh, sure, now the media tell us. Wall Street Journal wrote an article in June that the Biden team was spitting hot fire about because it was pointing out the president's schedule. Now, some of us have been pointing this out for years, but by mainstream media standards, the Wall Street Journal did a pretty good job on this. But if you can't receive bad news, you can't be president. Like that's pretty much the job. Don't tell the president that the poll numbers are bad, or don't tell. Like, responding to bad news is like what we have an executive branch for. That is the job. You're not there to just smile when they play Hail to the Chief and you enter a room, right? Meeting the national champions in every sport, that's nice, but that's not really what the job is, right? It's really, so there are two things that are really infuriating about this. One is that we're not even waiting until Biden's out of office to get these exposés of now we can tell you, yeah, it was really bad. I mean, we know we fooled you, but he was really in rough shape. No, you didn't fool us. We always knew he was in tough shape. And Greg, what day is today?
The 19th.
So he's
a month
president
from tomorrow.
for another month, right? So you know, any one of America's enemies, like America has a senile, non-functioning commander-in-chief. Now, my suspicion is every hostile state has known this for. If you and I could figure it out, chances are, the FSB or Chinese State Ministry of State Security, all these guys could figure it out. Good luck, America. One other last aspect of this: it is December 19th. We're getting into Christmas holiday. Traditionally, right around now, the outgoing president of the United States does an exit press conference, and they do some sort of exit interview. We haven't seen any of that from Joe Biden. Why have we not? Because he's not capable of doing it at age 22.
82.
I'm sorry?
You said 22.
You misheard me, Greg. I said 122. Some of us have been saying this for years now. And as I tweeted out this morning, between this and the lab leak, I really feel like Bugatu in Zoolander. Is nobody else seeing this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. And this is like my life has been for the last 5 years. I've been pointing out things where it's not that I was wrong, I was just right too early. And I'm sure there are a lot of listeners out there who feel the same way. So PolitiFact said that the eating the cats and dogs in Ohio is the lie of the year. Really? You don't think the president is healthy, is in a fine, and you just missed him doing cartwheels? You don't think that's the biggest lie of the year? I'm calm, people.
And it tells you about where Harris was or what people thought of Harris or cabinet secretaries. I mean, if Janet Yellen and Lloyd Austin can't get a hold of this guy for important stuff, and I mean, they've been around him. Austin's been there when Biden can't remember what his name is. And so, I mean, if you actually push for the 25th Amendment, you probably would have gotten it a couple different times, unless you're so convinced that the vice president is so not up to the job that you're stuck with the guy who's, at a diminished state.
Greg, you and I agree a lot. You've been a little unfair because remember, sometimes they just couldn't find out where Lloyd Austin was either. The president's senile. The vice president's a drunk. No, I'm sorry. She just enjoys her wine. And the Secretary of Defense is at death's door undergoing heart surgery. But other than that, government's fine, America.
Who is running the show? We don't know, but in a month we will. All right, let's talk about Z-Biotics. Because look, if you're a Biden administration official trying to cover all this up, or a rational person hearing constantly for 3.5 years that he's fine, I can understand some adult beverages. But take Z-Biotics first, because I guarantee you'll feel better the next morning if you do.
America, the constant gaslighting has turned me into a highly functional alcoholic. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. Scientists invented it to tackle your rough mornings after drinking. Now here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next morning. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, as I'm sure you always do, and you will feel your best the following morning.
Tonight is the Radio America staff Christmas party. I am not a drinker, but my colleague who I mentioned, he might have a drink or two, knows his limits well. But as he got older, those limits didn't work so well. And so he takes Z-Biotics now. Always feels great the next morning. Go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times.
Greg, before we move on, I just feel like listeners are going to want to know about this. Yes, every year at the Radio America Christmas party, Greg comes with a smile on his face and presents, finds a quiet corner, takes off his shoes, and waits.
Making fists with my toes. But nonetheless, let's move on to our other crazy martini now. We talked earlier in the week, Jim, about the settlement that ABC News agreed to, $16 million, to settle the case that Trump brought, a defamation suit, because George Stephanopoulos, during an interview on This Week, repeatedly cited Trump as being held liable for rape in the E. Jean Carroll case. And that is not correct. He was held liable for sexual abuse. ABC and Stephanopoulos said, hey, you need to correct this record publicly and apologize and all sorts of things. They wouldn't do it. But ultimately, they decided to pay up and issue at least a apology on their website or something like that. But Trump is not done with the lawsuits here. And the latest target is Ann Selzer, the recently retired pollster who got a lot of attention right before Election Day with her poll out of Iowa that Kamala Harris was leading there by 3 points. Definitely sent shockwaves. You and I think pretty much saw it as an outlier because nothing else was showing that. And ultimately, Trump won by 13 points. And so you probably chalk it up to really bad polling. But Trump is saying, no. That's not what happened here. According to this lawsuit, and this is the Washington Post report, Selzer would have the public believe that it was merely a coincidence that one of the worst polling misses of her career came just days before the most consequential election in memory. It later adds that the poll was not a miss, but rather an attempt to influence the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. Quote, President Trump, the Trump campaign, and other Republicans were forced to divert enormous campaign and financial resources to Iowa after the Selzer poll was released. Federal campaign finance documents indicate that Trump's campaign did pay more than $250,000 to a Cedar Rapids-based firm that does text message outreach on November 4th, and on it goes. And Jim, usually pollsters, if they're going to do misleading polls, it's not their last one because they want their last one to be as accurate as possible so they can say later on when the next cycle comes around, hey, look how close I was. But now that she's retired, and I don't know exactly how you prove that, you dig into the sampling or what have you. However it goes here, we'll see how the lawsuit pans out. But this one seems more of a reach because it's pretty hard to prove fraud in a poll, I think.
Yeah, I mean, unless you can find memos or some evidence that either the poll wasn't done, which happened. Was Daily Co said something? Was it Research 2000? There was some pollster years ago that turns out was not actually doing the polls and was just turning in numbers, and mathematicians looked at it and said it doesn't add up the way you're doing them. Or if the sample's coming back with something wildly different and you're dramatically altering, assuming 90% Democratic turnout. Like I could see a scenario where you could, whether you'd get that to hold up in court is a little bit different. And I think the contrast with the Stephanopoulos incident is useful. In media law, you want to prove libel, you want to prove slander, you have to prove either actual malice, meaning you decided deliberately to go out there to run something that's not true because you wanted to hurt somebody's reputation, or reckless disregard. You just didn't care. Somebody came along, told you a wild, crazy story. You didn't make any effort to verify it. You didn't make any effort to check it out. You just put it out there and hoped that it was going to turn out to be true. And in the case of the Stephanopoulos one, we don't know exactly. ABC settled. This did not go to trial. It's not like a judge said you have to pay this. But it is strongly suspected that the discovery process would not have gone well for ABC News. And reportedly, the New York Post says that Stephanopoulos' producer repeatedly warned him not to use the word rape before going on air to discuss Donald Trump. And he ignored the warning, and that's what cost the network $16 million. Oh, by the way, other news, George Stephanopoulos got a new contract from ABC News. Good to know that. Now, here's the thing. The last deal, reportedly, this is according to Fox News, made up to $18 million a year. Now, Greg, I don't know about you.
He could pay this whole thing himself.
You could have, first of all, yeah. Then secondly, I mean, $18 million a year, you can get a really good linebacker for that kind of money. Game manager quarterback, not super arm, but who's not going to throw a lot of picks. You can get so never mind some anchor. You can get somebody really valuable for money that big. But yeah, so he gets a new contract. Presuming, I'm going to go out on a limb and say the new one is lower. I'm going to guess that probably otherwise you let Stephanopoulos test the free agent market under scenarios like that. But if you're constantly told don't use the word rape, and then you go on and say rape, that's the sort of thing that's going to come out in discovery and look like either actual malice or reckless disregard, right? In this case with the poll, first of all, like as you mentioned, she retired. You quite literally drove her out of business. I don't know how, now we're really going to get her. We're going to stick it to her that way. Everybody knows she was wildly wrong. Everybody at the time looked at it as like, come on. Now, the other intriguing thing is that earlier in the year, she had Trump only up by 4. And this was a state, Iowa had been turning pretty red. And he'd won at the previous one by about 10 points off the top of my head. Like you're used to him winning in the neighborhood of double digits. So a 4-point lead was a bit on the smaller side. And that was I want to say 2 months earlier. So I think the lesson we're going to find from this is that Stelter just doesn't do the right, rebalancing of the sample. And, cranky old Democrats are very eager to talk on the phone, and cranky old Republicans are not eager to talk on the phone. And anybody under the age of 65 just don't want to talk on the phone at all. So you end up with a sample that has got a whole bunch of old Democrats, and lo and behold, Harris is ahead, even in a state like Iowa. And I think that's what, and also, Ann Stelter probably, should have looked at that and said, I am way out on a limb. Nobody else is finding anything resembling this. Does this smell right to me? Does this feel right to me? And apparently to her, yes, it did. And you saw the consequences of that. Now, I also remember we had talked about the clustering of polls and the sense that all these polls were in the same one, and the sense that some pollsters were kind of afraid to show what they were really finding. I don't know if that was the case. It did seem like the polling was remarkably consistent. And it wasn't wildly off, but remember, everyone's like, "Oh, these swing states are tight as a tick and neck and that stuff." And a bunch of them, Trump won by the margin of the outer edge of the margin of error, 2, 3, sometimes 4 points. So a lot of pollsters came out of this with a somewhat tarnished reputation. It's destroyed hers. She's not coming back. So I don't really understand the point of this lawsuit, but I guess the judges will see.
Ann Stelter has said that she told some news outlets that the findings from her last poll, which was obviously way off, could actually energize and activate Republican voters who thought they would likely coast to victory before that. And maybe that's what happened. So she's saying ultimately that.
No, it's not what happened. No.
So, yes, we'll see where it goes. Jim, we'll do it again tomorrow. Let's see what insanity we've got to talk about then.
Last of the year, Greg. See you tomorrow.
The last normal one of the year. Don't forget to listen next week. We did a lot of work. All right, Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Thursday and join us again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.